Hey guys, my name's Retik, and today I'll be showing you how to play Conquest. This guide is for a mix of those who are completely new to SMITE, as well as those who want to get into the mode. Because of this, I'll be going through the map, the roles you play, how minions work and other such things. I go pretty fast, as well as not 100% into detail, as a lot of it can be future videos if that's what you guys are interested in. I also have my own channel where I make other similar guides and content for SMITE. I upload weekly, as well as having other highlights and small pieces thrown in between where I can. This will all be linked in the description, as well as my social media. But without further ado, let's get into it. The main game mode of SMITE is Conquest. It's where two teams of 5 players each fight with the goal of killing the enemy's titan, which in turn wins them the game. All of which takes place on this map, with your titans placed here. The map contains a jungle with buff and heartbeat camps and 3 lanes, of which the titans are defended by minions who push down the lanes in waves of 6. These are used to gain experience to level up, but earn gold to buy items too. They also help to destroy the structures and lanes, otherwise known as towers and phoenixes. With there being 3 lanes on the map and each of them different from each other, they're called the dual lane, mid lane and the solar lane. The mid lane is in the middle of the map, while the dual lanes and solar lanes are both on opposite sides from each other. The best way to distinguish them is the distance between the 2 towers. The long distance lane is the dual lane and the short one is the solar lane. Laning in SMITE is one of the biggest things that you need to learn in order to play Conquest at its best. This means going over things such as last hitting and minion priority and how to work around it. The main thing that laning in SMITE is done for is gold and experience. These allow you to level up as well as buy items, which can help you to defeat the enemy in fights, as they increase stats and give special perks. Gold and experience are earned by loads of things: minions, towers, objectives, jungle buffs, harpies, nearly everything. However, the gold earned from minions can differ, depending on whether or not you got the last hit from them. A last hit is basically what you think, having the last hit of a minion before it dies. However, in some roles this is major, as the smallest increase in gold can help them to win lane or not. The differences in gold from last hits are on screen right now, but I'd always say to prioritise the lowest health minion first. This way you can secure the last hit so other minions don't steal it from you. With minions in SMITE being the AI controlled units that aid the gods, the players, in battle, they're pretty much trivial in comparison to the gods, and they should therefore be treated as a sort of human shield and lane. They're allied with one of 2 sides in Conquest, Order and Chaos, and they look different depending on what side they are. They push down the lanes and will attack as well as tank enemy units and structures. This is where minion priority comes in. Minion's first priority will always be another minion, which means that if you're fighting a wave who can't see any other minions in range, they'll turn on you and start piling attacks into you. However, when these minions do come into range of another wave, they'll turn and begin attacking them instead. This works the same with structures, so if you're standing in the middle of lane, blocking minions coming into tower, they're not just going to waltz past you and attack the tower. No, they're going to start attacking you since they saw you first. And because towers don't have legs and won't walk forward and move into the range minions do, the best way to fix this is to walk behind the tower. This means that the minions will walk forward and come into range of that tower, and because they've seen that now, they'll turn and begin attacking it instead, ignoring you in the process. This is because structures are a higher priority to minions over a god. However, there is one rule that forgets most of what I've just said, which is if you and an enemy god are both clearing waves, and you deal any amount of damage to this enemy god, the minions will ignore everything and just begin to pile into you. In the early stages of the game, this is especially dangerous, as the minions will be dealing a lot of damage and they're mostly your biggest threat right now. However, do remember though that there will be times where you want to attack the enemy gods while minions are around. However, in the early game, just concentrate on clearing the wave of minions first and then look to poke the god or rotate to a jungle camp. All of what I've just said works the exact same with structures. They target whoever's in range of their tower first, whether it be god or minion, and if you attack an enemy god while in range of the tower will switch to you and start shooting at you. However, do remember though that the tower won't stop attacking until you leave its range and it sees minions in there already. Towers are mostly a sort of safe zone in the early game. They're not to be taken lightly as they can kill you in only a few hits. Another thing about towers is that when minions get hit by a tower shot and you kill this minion, it will only yield experience, no gold. This is because towers negate any sort of gold reward from these minions. A tip I can give then is, instead of tanking your wave in the middle of lane and letting the enemy god attack you for no reason, you let the minions come into tower range and let the tower attack one of the melee minions instead. While this is happening, you can kill the ranged ones, which means you can secure the gold from these as the tower will only be attacking 1 or 2 targets during this. I know how a lot of this can be extremely complicated for new players at first, so I'd suggest going over it a few times and practicing from a few co-op games or something until you are comfortable with it. In Conquest, there are 5 different roles you can play, and they all play differently to one another as well. They each occupy specific parts of the map and roles within the team in order to win the game the most effectively. There is ADC, which stands for Attack, Damage, Carry, Support, Mid, Jungle, and Solo. ADC is a role where they mainly rely on their basic attacks for damage, and it's carried out by gods who have high basic attack damage, but I'd recommend just sticking to hunters and some mages such as Freya. They carry the team in the late game with their high damaging builds and help to kill the main objectives like Gold Fury, Fire Giant and Structures. They play in the dual lane with the support and are mostly dedicated to farming in the early to mid game to get their build online as soon as they can. In team fights, the ADC should be doing as much damage as they can, mainly to the squishier characters like the enemy ADC and mid laner, but because of builds in ADC, they can also attack the tanks when needed, because in late game they will be shredding, but the priority will always be the squishier characters. Support is the main tanky role of SMITE. They help to protect their allies in team fights as well as laning, and most of the time be the first initiator in team fights. Supports mainly start in the dual lane with the ADC and assist them by helping to clear the lane but not last hit minions, we'll talk about this more later, and after a while begin to rotate around the entire map to help his teammates as a whole. He wants to help clear waves as well as jungle buffs with the jungler or mid between the waves. Support can be played by a number of classes, but they generally have guardians and warriors playing there, big bruisers with defensive utility builds that can withstand a lot of damage, so the squishy carries don't have to. In team fights, the support's job is to generally initiate the fights first, but to also protect their allies and take as much damage as they can, but be wary not to take too much damage, because if you do die, your teammates are going to have no one to really protect them from the enemy team. Mid is the role where the player controls the middle lane. They serve as a link between the two side lanes, duo and solo, and because of the small distance between the two lanes, it allows the mid to rotate quickly for engagements on either side. The role of a mid laner is to deal high burst damage, while at the same time keeping your eye out for enemy rotations. This is because they will usually cross the mid lane in order to reach a fight, which means you can alert your teammates to it quickly, and that way they can react in time for them as well. The mid lane will also want to help secure buff camps and harpies closest to the mid lane, with the jungler and support. A good mid laner will want to do this in between waves of minions, in order to maximise the amount of gold and experience he will be getting. Gods in the mid lane mainly consist of high bursting mages, but it isn't out of the ordinary to have some hunters with high clearing abilities in there too. In team fights, the mid laner should aim to do as much damage as possible to as many targets as they can too, while positioning themselves so they take a little damage, since they're very squishy, similar to the ADC. The role of a jungler is a difficult one. This is because they need to set the tempo of the game by orchestrating the early to mid game, with timely ganks and rotations to different lanes and helping their teammates get ahead of their counterparts in lane. A gank is where a player, mainly the jungler, enters the lane of another role, in this case the ADC, with the intention of killing the enemy player here. This can help said teammate to get ahead in lane, since the enemy will be missing out on waves of gold and experience. Similar to the support, the jungler doesn't have a lane. He rotates around the map and farms from the jungle, which contains harpies and buff camps, and because of an item the junglers buy, called Bumba's Mask, they will receive more gold from the camps that they kill in the jungle. The jungler should be looking for farm where they can, but due to the limited amount of jungle there actually is though, in between buff time it's beneficial for them to split waves with the mid and solo lanes, but not the duo, since they want to get online as soon as they can. Jungle is one of those roles where a lot of gods can be played in the role, but generally for beginners I'd recommend sticking to assassins such as Thor. They build mostly damage but have some defense in there as well. This also depends on what god they're playing and how they're playing it as well. In team fights, the jungler will want to go to the backline and kill a high priority target, mainly the mid or ADC. He wants to do this fast and get out as quickly as possible. This can turn a team fight and in turn the game if you're able to do so early. Solo is one of those roles where it's really dependent on what you're playing and what you can do for your team. The basics of it is that they occupy the solo lane and look to farm up gold and experience there, while looking for meaningful rotations wherever they can, but without losing farm in the process. They tend to stay in lane for the majority of early to mid in a 1v1 matchup, but when that ends they look to join up with the rest of their team and look for fights over objectives and structures. A big part of solo is something called counter building. This is something I don't really want to go over since it'd just make the video longer than it needs to be, plus it's pretty complicated for new players, but at the same time you should still know what it is. Just know that there are some items that you can buy which can counter the enemy's strengths and influence their play, such as Hide of the Nemean Lion, which as of making this video gives physical protections, mana and MP5, mana per 5 seconds, but the big thing about it is it's passive. It reflects 25% of all basic attack damage back to the attacker. This means against a god composition of gods who use a lot of basic attacks, such as hunters or assassins like Kali or Bakasura, this item would be really invaluable since they wouldn't be able to really attack you without dealing damage to themselves in the process. Even though a lot can be played in solo, I'd recommend sticking to the warriors for new players, with your build being to counter your opponents with tanky-ish items in there. A solo laner's role in teamfights is mostly dependent on what you're playing. It's generally to separate enemies from their teammates and distract them as much as possible. This is known as zoning, which means that they can't get into the fight to help their own team, therefore your own team can overpower the enemy with more numbers in that fight. So as I said earlier, the SMITE map is made up of 3 lanes and a jungle, and within the jungle there are a lot of icons and things that you can see. These are the jungle buffs and camps. They're mostly farmed by the jungler, but also roles for buffs that are closest to their lane. There are quite a few of them, and Hyras like to change them for balance as well, so I'm just going to tell you what they are as of patch 4.12. There are 4 jungle buff camps, and they're each defended by 3 Cyclopses, 2 small and 1 big. And when the big one is killed, it will drop a tiny buff that, when picked up, will give you a special perk for the duration of that buff. So because there are 4 of them, and they each give a buff when picked up, they are the purple buff, which when picked up gives an aura that reduces enemy gods' protections by 10. The red buff, which increases your physical and magical damage by 20%, as well as your power too. The speed buff, which increases movement speed by 20. And the blue buff, which grants plus 25 mana per 5 seconds, and 10% increased cooldown reduction. Now, each of these buffs go to specific roles the majority of the time. The purple buff goes to the support, the red buff to the mid laner, or the ADC in some cases, the speed buff to the jungler, and the blue buff to the solo laner. Also, a quick thing that I want to let you know about is invading, which is basically when a team goes into the other side of the jungle and they start taking buffs whenever they're available. I don't really want to go into this since I have an idea to make it a separate video in the future. The other camps in the jungle are the oracles, which awards an indestructible ward on the gold fury pit when killed. We'll talk about wards later, I promise. Which gives vision of that area. The portal demon, which when killed creates a portal that connects to your team's base that allows for an instant rotation to the fire giant. The fire elementals that award just a flat golden experience when killed. The mid harpies that also just give golden experience. And the back harpies, which are mostly for the jungler but other roles to farm when they're on their way to other things like lane or another buff, they just give experience and gold too. A big thing about those is that there is only one of each of them. Well, there's 2 mid camps, but they're all in the middle of the map, and therefore they're camps that are contested between the 2 teams, and they should be looked at with importance after the buff camps, as it can give you an edge over the other team in gold and experience. The buff camps still take priority though, because the buffs are important to secure for your team, as well as the gold and experience they yield. Now, I could tell you how and when it's optimal to clear these, but I plan to go over this in high detail in a future video. Just know that the people who need the buff should be clearing it with another player to share the golden experience. A thing to mention here is where to position yourself at the beginning of the game. Well, since the starts changed so much in the meta, I can't really tell you. The best way to find out is by watching pro player streams on Twitch or the SBL and find out what the majority of them are doing in the beginning of the game. You can start in lane, at the buffs, or anywhere. There's quite a few. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. What the hell are these rotation things he keeps talking about? Well, it's basically when you're in lane doing your usual stuff, clearing waves, soloing the enemy, or just watching the crabs on the beach. If you see the enemy leave lane and know that he's going somewhere else, this is normally either to do a jungle camp, but the bigger thing you need to be aware of is them going to another lane in order to group up with their team for a fight. These are both called rotations. This is a big thing in any MOBA, as it's a key component to force the issue of your lead or look to gain one, whether this be a small skirmish or a full-on objective fight over the Gold Fury or Fire Giant. The reason I'm telling you this is because you need to be able to alert your teammates to the whereabouts of the enemy team in order to make sure they're not doing things that will put you behind or ganking another member of your team. The best way to counteract this is to communicate with your team that they've left lane, using either the VGS system to alert that they're missing or incoming, or simply pinging the map in the direction that they've left and are most likely headed. We'll talk about both of these more later. Another thing to add with rotations is that most of the time it's a good idea to rotate with the enemy as well, since that way you're able to support your team in a fight if one does break out. Eventually you'll be able to notice a good time to either stay in lane and split push, or to actually go, but for beginners I'd say rotating is your best option. Just make sure not to walk into the enemy team though while on your way there. There are 2 objectives in SMITE that fights are contested over. These both give massive rewards, and these shouldn't be given freely as it's the easiest way for the enemy team to snowball out of control. There is the Gold Fury and the Fire Giant. The Gold Fury is a much bigger harpy that is a sort of mini boss. It needs multiple members of your team to defeat, especially in the early game, because when it's killed it grants a base amount of gold and experience, as well as more that increases as the game goes on. This is the main objective that you want to be fighting over in the early game. You don't want to be killing it within the first few minutes, as of patch 4.12, because it won't be awarding that much in terms of gold and experience, to the point where it's worth a fight over. There aren't any advanced mechanics to this objective, it just attacks the target who hits it first, and continues to do so until it dies or resets. The other objective on the map is the Fire Giant. Now this big is the strongest thing on the map, and it's the most important objective. This is because when it's killed, it gives a buff that increases your power by a lot, as well as increasing your HP 5 and MP 5, and it increases damage against towers and phoenixes by 20%. Therefore, it's essential that you are the one to kill this guy, and not the enemy team, as it makes it pretty difficult to fight into, definitely not impossible though. The Fire Giant does have mechanics in it though that need to be learnt in order to tank it properly. He stands still and doesn't move, and has 3 types of attacks. He has a range/melee attack, depending on where the player who's tanking him is positioned, a line attack called Magma Blast, and Molten Pulse. Now there is a technique to this, as he always attacks in the same order. He attacks twice normally, then he will cast his Magma Blast. This slows you as well as knocking up, dealing a decent amount of damage. Therefore, after his second attack, you should start moving straight away in order to avoid being hit by this. After his first Magma Blast, he will then attack twice and then cast another Magma Blast. Make sure to avoid that as well. And then he will attack another 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then he will cast his Magma Pulse. Now, these don't have any CC to them, crowd control. They just deal damage while someone is standing in them. Therefore, when he's about to cast them, it's important for both melee and range characters to take a step back and try to spread them as much as they can, because afterwards he'll just go back into a cycle and begin attacking in the same order again. A very, very important thing to remember about both objectives here is that the rewards of gold and experience, as well as the buff, if it is the fire giant, will be given to the team who lands the killing blow. This means that a team can be attacking it for ages, only to have someone come in and throw an ability at it or snipe it from afar, securing the last hit. They're the ones who will gain the objective for their team. Therefore, it's essential that you're able to burst the objective's health as it becomes low, in order to lower the chance of it being stolen, as well as having one member of your team off defending to prevent people from actually getting in range. I'll quickly mention something about structures in here as well, as they're an important objective in and of themselves. So towers and phoenixes are the structures and lanes that stop minions from reaching and attacking the titan. This means that while minions are tanking a structure, you should be basic attacking it to destroy it. Remember though that structures don't take damage from abilities, only basic attacks, so don't bother trying. Remember though, don't always be pushing towers by yourself, as it's the easiest way for you to be caught and ganked by the enemy team. Most of the time, group up with your team to destroy these towers. However, if you're aware of the position of the enemy team, sometimes it is safe to stay in lane and push this tower down. This is called split pushing. Towers when killed, stay like that, they don't come back. However, when you kill a phoenix, after a while it will respawn. Phoenixes also change the type of minion that pushes down the lane that the phoenix is in. These are called fire minions. They deal double the damage as well as having increased health, making them more difficult to kill, plus they have an advantage over normal minions, and therefore they'll push down the lanes without the aid of another player. So the final bit before we end this video for being too long is about communication. Communication is imperative in any multiplayer co-op game, whether it be a MOBA, an FPS, or an MMO, and SMITE has some pretty smart things in order to aid you with this, so I'm going to quickly go over them now. There's a thing called the VGS system that we talked about earlier, which is the voice guided system. It's a library of preset voice commands that allows players to communicate with their team without having to spend longer typing it out a message that makes them lose farm or can be picked out somewhere by mistake. Now, they're each set into different categories and it's accessed by pressing the V key by default. Here's a table of them and what they mean. It would take too long to go through each one individually. So this is something I highly recommend that you teach yourself to get comfortable with, as it can save massive amounts of time. It's pretty complicated at first, but eventually when you get the hang of it, it becomes pretty simple. Another thing is the ping function. This is similar to that of pinging in like League, but without as many choices. You simply hold Alt and move your mouse over the map and left and right click. Now this is something that I'd also highly recommend if you want to describe something important and quickly, because it's the easiest way to grab the attention of your team to something. This is because VGS can be difficult to hear over a team fighting things. The last thing that I really should have talked about earlier is warding. Warding is crucial to any MOBA, and it's the same in SMITE. A ward is a consumable that you can buy in the item shop that are able to be placed on the map. This awards vision of that area to you and your team and allows them to track enemy movements in and around that ward. Now, you aren't able to see enemy wards unless you buy the upgraded version of that ward, a sentry ward. This has increased range and allows you to see normal wards and destroy them. There are places to be putting down wards for each specific role, and I've quickly highlighted each place on this map, but this is simple and clean. I'll definitely be making a longer video on it in the future, but I'd recommend just watching DukeSloth and Emil's video on it, which is linked up top right now. So that's it, my Conquest guide. This is my first time doing something like this, so I'd appreciate any feedback given. Make sure to do so in the comments. I definitely would not have been able to do this without the help of some individuals. All of them helped in the making of this video, and their links are in the description. Make sure to go check them all out. Massive shout out to Duke for uploading this to his channel. As I said earlier, I'm pretty new to anything like this, and I will definitely be making more videos in the future. Make sure to let me know what you want to see in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more content like this in the future. And with that guys, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
A happy little meltdown.